Do you know what the cruelest trap of all is? It isn't your own suffering. You can endure that. You already have. The true hell is feeling the suffering of everyone else. Every lost stare on the subway. Every tear someone hides behind a fake smile. Every silent scream of a soul breaking while the world keeps turning as if nothing is wrong. And the worst part, the absolutely devastating part, is that no one believes you. No one understands that you're not being dramatic, that you're not exaggerating, that you are literally feeling other people's pain as if it were your own. Because you're an empath. And that, my friends, is not a gift. It's a curse no one warned you that you would have to carry. And there is a breaking point. A moment when something inside you says enough. When the infinite compassion you've poured into the world transforms into something dark, something terrible, something you barely recognize in yourself. Alan Watts saw this. He described it. And what he said is so disturbing that most people prefer to ignore it. Because if it's true, if we truly understand what happens when an empath breaks, then everything you believe about goodness, spirituality, and human nature collapses. Because Watts didn't speak of this as a metaphor. He spoke of it as a real psychological phenomenon, as an inevitable phase in the development of certain souls. And he called it the day the empath collapses. The day the most compassionate person you know becomes the most dangerous. Not because they become physically violent, but because they discover something that changes everything. That love without limits is self-destruction. That giving without receiving is slow suicide. And that perhaps, just perhaps, cruelty has its place in the cosmic balance. And before you think this is exaggerated, let me explain who empaths really are. They are not simply sensitive people. They are not just those who cry at sad movies or are moved by emotional stories. That is basic empathy, which we all share to some degree. True empaths are something else entirely. They are individuals whose nervous systems are wired differently. They literally process other people's emotions as if they were their own. They walk into a room and feel the tension even if no one speaks. They look at someone and know, without words, what that person is going through. It's involuntary, constant, exhausting. Neuroscience offers partial explanations. Hyperactive mirror neurons. Greater connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. Reduced sensory filtering. But none of that captures the lived experience. It doesn't explain how an empath can walk into a hospital and feel physically ill from the collective pain. It doesn't explain how they can know someone is going to die days in advance with no external evidence. It doesn't explain the dreams where they relive other people's trauma as if it happened to them. Alan Watts understood this from another perspective, through Eastern traditions that speak of past lives, accumulated karma, ancient souls who have lived so many existences absorbing suffering that they arrive in this life with an expanded capacity to feel. Not as a reward, but as a burden, as unfinished work, as a debt to the universe that must be paid by feeling, healing, and transmuting humanity's pain. And these beings, these deep empaths, spend the first part of their lives completely confused. They don't understand why they feel so much, why they can't simply disconnect like others, why violent movies make them physically nauseous, why crowds drain them until they're empty, why broken people are constantly drawn to them, telling them their darkest secrets 5 minutes after meeting them. It's as if they carry an invisible sign that says, here is someone who will understand me. And they're right. The empath always understands. But understanding has a cost, because every time you hold someone else's pain, a piece of it stays with you. Every story of abuse you hear, every confession of addiction, every tale of loss leaves a mark. And if you're an empath, you can't just listen and forget. You absorb it. You process it internally. You carry it with you. Over time, you're carrying pain that isn't even yours. You're carrying the emotional backpacks of dozens, hundreds of people. And no one ever taught you how to put them down. So you begin developing survival strategies. You isolate. You limit social contact. You avoid crowded places. You decline invitations. People think you're antisocial, strange, difficult. But the truth is, you're protecting what little is left of yourself. Because if you don't, if you expose yourself too much, you completely melt down. Your identity dissolves into the ocean of other people's emotions, and you no longer know where you end and where others begin. And here lies the cruel paradox. Empaths are the first to help and the last to ask for help, because they've learned something terrible. They've learned that when they try to express their pain, people don't understand. They're told they're too sensitive, that they take everything too personally, that they need thicker skin. And every time they hear that, the wound deepens. Because they're not weak, they're designed to feel more. And asking them to feel less is like asking someone with perfect pitch to stop hearing when a note is off. It's impossible. Alan Watts observed this pattern repeatedly in people who came to him seeking spiritual guidance. Kind, compassionate souls devoted to service who reached a critical point. And that point wasn't when they finally received help. It was when they realized something devastating. Their kindness had been exploited. The people they helped unconditionally would never have done the same for them. Their generosity had been interpreted as weakness. Their compassion had attracted not other, compassionate beings, but emotional predators who fed on their light. And that realization breaks something fundamental, because the empath operates from a basic premise that love is the answer, that compassion heals, that if you give enough, love enough, good will eventually prevail. But when they discover that some people only take and never give, that there are energy vampires who drain without remorse, that narcissists see their kindness as something to exploit, their entire worldview collapses. Then comes the phase Watts described in chilling detail, the dark transformation. The empath doesn't lose the ability to feel. On the contrary, it intensifies. But now, instead of absorbing pain to heal it, they perceive it with surgical clarity. They see exactly where others are wounded. They see insecurities, fears, unprocessed trauma. And for the first time in their life, they feel the temptation to use it, not to heal, but to hurt. Because they now understand something terrifying. Knowing someone's inner world gives you immense power. With a single word, a precise observation, you can destroy someone. You can touch the wound that hurts the most, expose the secret they fear most, dismantle the facade they spent years building. And the dark voice whispers, "Why not? Why should I protect those who never protected me? Why should I keep the secrets of those who betrayed mine? Why should I have compassion for those who had none for me?" This, Watts says, is the empath's true hell. Not becoming numb, that would be easier, but retaining all their sensitivity, now stained with bitterness, with resentment, with the knowledge that the world doesn't operate by the universal laws of love they were taught. that there are predators and prey, givers and takers, and that empaths have been prey for far too long. Some cross the line. They become what's called dark empaths, people who use their deep understanding of the human psyche not to heal but to manipulate. And they are terrifyingly effective because they know exactly what to say, which buttons to press, which wounds to touch, which masks to wear. They are the most dangerous manipulators because their manipulation is informed by genuine empathic perception. They're not guessing. They're reading your soul and using that information strategically. And here's the most disturbing part. These dark empaths often justify their behavior as justice, as karmic balance. They say, "I gave for years and no one valued it. Now I'll take what I'm owed." And from their distorted perspective, they're not being cruel. They're being realistic. They're finally playing the game as it truly is, not as they were told it should be. Watts didn't see this as pathology, but as a stage, a painful but perhaps necessary phase in the evolution of certain souls. Because the empath who never learns to say no, who never sets boundaries, who never accepts that they can't save everyone, is doomed to total exhaustion, doomed to be used until nothing remains. And perhaps that dark phase, that time in the desert, is necessary to learn balance. Because the goal isn't infinite compassion without discernment. It's wise compassion, compassion that isn't naive. That understands helping someone who doesn't want help is useless. That recognizes there are toxic people you must walk away from, even if it hurts. That accepts your first responsibility is to yourself. Because if you empty yourself completely, you have nothing left to give. Getting there requires walking through fire, being betrayed enough times to finally understand not everyone deserves access to your inner world, feeling the extreme exhaustion of carrying too much for too long, sometimes visiting that dark place where you consider using your gift as a weapon. And then, if you're lucky, if you have guidance, if you have will, you return. But you return transformed. You return as an empath with boundaries, someone who still feels deeply but has learned to filter, who can perceive others' pain without automatically absorbing it, who can offer compassion without emptying themselves, who can say no without guilt, who can walk away from toxic relationships without feeling they're abandoning their spiritual purpose. Watts insisted this transformation was crucial because unevolved empaths are dangerous in two ways. First, they're dangerous to themselves. They slowly self-destruct, confusing martyrdom with virtue. Second, when they finally collapse, the pendulum swings violently to the opposite extreme. And a broken empath who becomes manipulative is infinitely more damaging than an ordinary narcissist, because they possess far more sophisticated tools. So what's the way out? How does an empath avoid reaching that breaking point? Watts proposed several practices, all centered on one concept: disidentification. Learning to observe emotions without being dragged by them. Realizing you can perceive someone's suffering without becoming that suffering. That you can feel compassion without merging with the other. This requires deep meditation, not as relaxation, but as rigorous training of awareness. Learning to create inner space. Learning to say, "I perceive this emotion, but I am not this emotion. I feel this pain, but it is not my pain. I recognize this suffering, but I do not have to carry it." It also requires what Watts called shadow knowledge, acknowledging your dark side, accepting that you're capable of cruelty, manipulation, revenge, not to act it out, but to integrate it. Because when you deny your shadow, when you identify only with light and goodness, the shadow grows underground and eventually erupts destructively. But when you acknowledge it, it loses its power over you. And it requires community. Empaths desperately need to connect with other empaths. Only they truly understand. Only they can validate the experience without calling you crazy or dramatic. Only they can hold your pain without judging you for having it. And in that mutual recognition, there is healing. Perhaps the most important thing Watts taught was this: being an empath doesn't make you superior. It makes you different, with specific talents and specific challenges. And your task is not to save the world. Your task is to learn how to navigate your sensitivity so you can live a full life without destroying yourself. Because a burned-out empath helps no one. A balanced empath can change lives without sacrificing their own. There are warning signs that you're nearing the breaking point. Resentment toward those you help. Fantasies of disappearing. Feeling irritation instead of compassion when someone shares their problems. Avoiding deep interactions because you know they'll cost you. Thinking everyone is selfish except you. When bitterness replaces sadness. These are alarms, signals that you're exhausted beyond what's sustainable. If you're there, the first thing you need is permission. Permission to withdraw. To say you can't right now. To prioritize your healing over others' needs. I know this goes against everything you were taught, against your nature, against your sense of purpose. But hear this clearly. If you don't save yourself first, you won't save anyone. If you drown trying to keep others afloat, everyone sinks. Watts told a story that always struck me. A Buddhist monk who devoted decades to service, feeding the poor, healing the sick, comforting the suffering, revered as a living saint. One day, he disappeared. He went to a mountain cave and spoke to no one for 3 years. When he returned, someone asked why. He answered, "Because I realized my compassion had become compulsion. I was no longer helping out of love, but out of fear of not being enough if I stopped. I needed silence to remember who I was beyond the savior role." That is the most subtle trap. The empath confuses identity with function. You believe you are your gift, that you are your ability to feel and heal. And when that becomes your entire identity, you're trapped. Any boundary feels like betrayal. Any no feels like failure. And you become a slave to your own gift. Freedom comes when you understand that you are the awareness behind the gift. You are not the empath. You are the conscious being who can be empathic. And as a conscious being, you have choices. You can choose when and how to use your sensitivity, who you share your depth with, when to withdraw and regenerate. You are not obligated to feel everything all the time for everyone. Here's the beautiful irony. When you finally learn this, when you set healthy boundaries, your capacity to genuinely help increases. Because now you help from fullness, not emptiness. You help by choice, not compulsion. And that help is cleaner, more effective, more sustainable. But the path there is brutal. It requires the empath to die and be reborn, to release the martyr identity, to abandon the fantasy that enough love can heal everything, to accept that there are limits to what one human can carry, and to recognize that caring for yourself is not selfish. It's spiritual survival. If you've read this far and something here resonates in your core, you are likely one of them. One of those who feel too much in a world that feels too little. And you need to hear this. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your ability to feel is sacred, but you must honor it by setting boundaries that protect it. You cannot save everyone, and trying will destroy you. The world needs balanced empaths, people who can feel deeply without drowning in collective pain, who can offer compassion without self-sacrifice, who can be light without burning out. And that's only possible when you learn the hardest lesson. Loving others begins with loving yourself enough not to destroy yourself in the process. And perhaps that terrible day, the day the empath collapses, is not the end. Perhaps it's the beginning of true spiritual maturity, where naive compassion becomes wise compassion, where limitless love becomes intelligent love, where the gift finally finds balance. Because in the end, as Watts insisted, it's not about stopping feeling. It's about learning to feel without drowning, keeping your heart open without letting yourself bleed out, being a bridge between worlds without becoming a sacrifice. That is the true art of being an empath in a world that doesn't understand what it means to be one. If you made it to the end, comment, "I am an empath," and I will personally reply. And if this content resonated with you, subscribe to be part of the community and leave a like if you enjoyed it. See you next time.